The following program is part of a college course. These telecourses allow you to earn college credits at home. For more information, contact a college or university near you.
In nature, all organisms depend on their environment and each other to survive. Plants use the sun's energy. Herbivores eat the plants. Carnivores hunt the herbivores. Biologists call the study of these interactions ecology, and with it they reveal a complex series of relationships, a web of life that sustains us all. Near the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains, along the banks of a river known as the Santa Ana, lives a small organism whose life is in danger.
So there's a nice dense population over there.
It's late summer, and Dr. Jack Burke and his students are here to harvest the seeds of this rare plant, found nowhere else in the world.
This is the Santa Ana River woolly star, the plant that we're going to be collecting seeds from today. The Santa Ana River woolly star is a member of the phlox family. It now is restricted to about 6 square mile area just as the river comes out of the mountains.
To help this endangered species, Dr. Burke and his team will plant the seeds they collect in the loose sand of the river's edge.
It's fairly unique in terms of its ecology because it occupies very nutrient-poor habitats for short periods of time. And its long-term existence depends upon those periodic floods that are going to bring in new washed sand.
But the flooding upon which this plant depends is itself threatened by new construction upstream, a dam. This will not only affect the woolly star, but many species in this community of organisms.
It is not the single species necessarily that's so important, but how that species interacts with a variety of other organisms in its environment. And if you damage or injure any one of those species, then it can have a ripple effect throughout the community of organisms, and the interactions can be very negative on a variety of species.
The woolly star represents a single strand in an interacting web of living organisms that depend on each other for their survival.
The woolly star also is a species that comes in and helps to stabilize the sand deposits immediately after a flood event. And without the woolly star, there are fewer species that will come in and help stabilize these sand deposits.
As an endangered species, the woolly star also serves as an important barometer of this habitat's health.
That's one reason why it's important to be concerned about species that are becoming rare. They are a sensor of the habitat, really. There's always been rare plants, there's always been rare animals, and they're the ones that are going to be the most sensitive to changes in habitat.
So, to gauge the health of this community, scientists must continually monitor the population of sensitive plants in this region, including the woolly star.
One of the things that we're doing with the Santa Ana River woolly star now is beginning demography studies, or studies where we're counting the numbers of individuals in various size and age categories in order to project the population into the future and make sure that we have some warning as the population numbers start to go down. The plots that we use for our studies are located geographically by a global positioning system. which is a system of satellites. We take the receiver into the field with us, and we can locate quite precisely locations of study plots or particular plants.
It says they're real close to the...
Biologists use various means to sample the environment because it would be impossible for us to literally go out and look at an entire environment and count every individual. One of the ways to do that is to set up what is known as a line transect.
These are simply tapes that we lay out, and we go along and look at the distance along that tape that is intercepted by each plant.
3.5 meters bare ground.
And record the species name and the distance that's covered by that particular individual.
0.5 meters woolly star.
Once gathered, scientists can plot this data in a population growth curve.
The growth curve is a mathematical representation of the rate of change in numbers of individuals in a population through time. Different kinds of organisms have different kinds of growth curves. Organisms that live in temporary habitats, mosquitoes or flies or bacteria, are examples of organisms that have J-shaped growth curves.
Populations of small, short-lived animals often grow in J-shaped patterns. With plenty of food and living space, the population doubles at a regular rate. Still, growth lags because so few organisms are present. But as the number of individuals reaches a critical mass, each doubling produces a dramatic increase in growth. Finally, the number of organisms outpaces the resources available in the environment. Birth rates drop and death rates rise, often causing a dramatic crash in the population size.
In contrast to J-shaped growth curves, where population growth is independent of density, S-shaped growth curves show that the more individuals you have in the population, the more limiting the environment is toward population growth.
Most large, long-lived organisms grow in S-shaped curves. With plenty of food and living space, the population size doubles in the typical J pattern. But as more organisms appear, they must compete against each other for limited resources. In time, the population stabilizes at a level the environment can sustain, what scientists call the carrying capacity. If the availability of resources changes, the carrying capacity also changes. In nature, resources act as the limiting factors which control population growth.
All organisms have factors that limit their distribution. In the case of the woolly star, the distribution is limited by the availability of sand habitats, for example.
But with a dam being built upstream, Dr. Burke and his team must engineer their own ways to maintain this precious habitat.
We expect that over the next few decades, in the absence of flooding, that there will be no new sand laid down and that all of the habitat will eventually degrade. And so what we want to do is go in and figure out the least expensive means of rejuvenating that habitat. We'll actually move in clean wash sand and put on the surface.
What's at stake is the very survival of this living organism, already on the verge of extinction.
Going extinct certainly is part of nature. Going extinct at the rate species are going extinct nowadays is not a natural phenomenon. It's happening very, very rapidly now. And it's fairly clear that most of that is because of human activity.
Just as the woolly star depends on the sandy soil of its habitat, there are insects which depend on the plant. These insects offer nutrition for local rodent and bird populations, which provide food for many other animals, including the predators of the sky. As the afternoon dims over Star Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary, biologist Pete Bloom prepares for a nighttime drama. Using the tools of his trade and a skill bred from years of experience, he will attempt to capture an elusive nocturnal predator, the owl.
In terms of trapping, the best location if we want diversity and for a number of owls is to trap in the woodland areas. This is where all of them nest and most of them hunt.
In addition to suspending nets, Pete and his team position specially designed traps on the ground.
It has monofilament nooses that we tie onto the traps, and we put leaves in these traps to create a situation where the bait in the trap will create enough noise that an owl will detect the sound of this little rodent and fly over to it and either hit a net or actually land on the trap. Okay. We have a transmitter that's attached to this trap and a receiver which we monitor from a half a mile or a mile away.
Owls and the rodents they hunt represent just a few of the species which make up this community of organisms.
Community is a group of associated species that tend to occur together all the time. For example, sycamores and cottonwood trees tend to occur together and along streams, and so they become indicators for the riparian community. Abutting the riparian community, but some distance away from the running water, you get these deep-rooted trees that we call the oak woodland.
In this particular case, at Star Ranch Audubon Sanctuary, the oak woodland riparian community consists of a half a dozen species of owls, and we have a population of small rodents, and the owls take all of them to varying degrees, different proportions. Rodent trapping is something I do mainly to assist me with evaluating the diet and the importance of various species to the diet of owls. Sometimes I get a little hint of an idea of what might be the more common animal that year. Of course, the owls are more than ready to take on those surpluses and actually respond to those surpluses by producing more eggs in those years of high rodent productivity.
So the population of owls depends on the population of the rodents they hunt. This relationship between predators and prey makes up only one of many interactions in this diverse community.
Species don't occur in isolation. They interact with each other. When we talk about animal species, the most obvious interaction always seems to be the predator-prey relationship. One of the members of the partnership is harmed and the other benefits.
Another type of interaction that benefits one species over another is called parasitism.
Probably the most clear-cut example of parasitism that you would find in a community like this is the yellow, stringy stuff that festoons over the top of the vegetation. We call it dodder. It taps into the system of the plant that produces the sap and therefore benefits from the photosynthetic product of the plant.
Scientists call specialized interactions like these symbiosis, meaning the species live together in close association.
We have an example known as mutualism, where both members of the partnership benefit. And some of the most interesting examples of mutualism can be found in this kind of a community. For example, the yucca and its pollinator, the yucca moth. It actually literally packs the pollen into the stigma and then goes down to the base of the flower where it drills into the ovary of the flower and lays its eggs on the inside of the ovary.
Another example of symbiosis includes cases where one species benefits while the other is unharmed, an interaction called commensalism.
An example could be a simple thing like a hole in a tree is the home for an owl, and therefore in that circumstance that's a commensalistic relationship because the owl presence certainly doesn't hurt the tree.
Nets in the south.
Back in the oak grove, Pete and his assistant attempt to stay warm and wait. They decide to use the time to inspect their nets. While the radio receiver will alert them to an owl in a ground trap, they must check the nets visually.
You need to check the nets repeatedly, at least at hourly intervals, because you don't want the owl to remain in the net too long. As it struggles, it gets more and more worn out, and if it's a cold night, the owl could die in the net.
Hey, we got something.
They've captured the smallest species in this area, the western screech owl. Only 6 inches tall, this owl hunts under the cover of the oak forest in an example of what biologists call competitive exclusion.
The classic concept of competitive exclusion says that if you have two species that compete for the same resource, one of them obviously is going to be better at exploiting that resource and in due time will eliminate the other.
There are 4 species of owls that occur in this community, and 3 of them are extremely common: the barn owl, great horned owl, and screech owl. These owls all have their own little niche. They may occupy the same area in the same space, but they utilize that habitat differently.
So what will occur is that the larger owl, a great horned, will prey on larger prey. Medium-sized barn owl will prey on medium-sized rodents, and then the smaller screech owl will prey on smaller ones, and in so doing, divide up the wealth and reduce competition as much as possible.
Approaching midnight, just as the two begin to wonder if their radio receiver is operating, the signal arrives.
There we go. 216.450.
Okay, 450 is down on this side.
Okay.
It's in the sycamore.
Well, when that buzzer sounds off, it's kind of like being a fireman, and you want to get to the source of the excitement as rapidly as you can.
Okay, here we are, here we are.
The first thing we need to do is band it. A marked animal allows you to identify it over time. It's essentially a small license plate. Secondly, when we catch the owl, we obviously identify it to species, we sex it and age it.
This is a female barn owl, and it's one of the more common
When looking at this
owls
owl,
here in the sanctuary.
I'm learning from it because each animal supplies some new piece of information that subtly modifies my view on the basic ecology of the species.
During this long-term study, Pete has learned that the population of owls in this area is rapidly fading.
Protecting habitat is the key to protecting owls in this region. Housing developments and industrial developments continue to encroach, and those species that are least common, namely the larger predators, are going to be the first to go. And when those go, the ecosystem gradually collapses. Things get out of order. What once was a system becomes chaotic.
Humans seem to become disconnected from the system. They've lost track of the fact that they are part of this ecosystem concept, and we have to operate according to the same rules as all the other organisms in nature. And planet Earth has to provide the food for all living organisms that are here, and humans are just one of those organisms.
Biologically speaking, Homo sapiens are one of the most successful species on Earth. Through our ability to postpone the effects of natural population controls, our numbers have grown with astonishing speed.
It took us literally 99% of all of human history, all of known human history up to the present, to reach the situation where we had 1 billion people alive on the planet. And then it took about 130 years or so to reach the 2nd billion.
Where humans are most different from other organisms is in our technology. With our technology, we have been able to increase natural carrying capacities of the earth for humans. Agriculture was the first example.
The first real control over the environment that we were able to achieve occurred about 10,000 years ago, and that's what we call the agricultural revolution, where we managed to control the food supply to the extent that we domesticated plants and animals and were able to grow our own food rather than be completely dependent upon the whims and fancies of nature.
While the agricultural revolution helped humans increase their numbers, it was the industrial revolution which ignited the population explosion we see today.
With the Industrial Revolution, we were able to harness other sources of energy. We were able to begin to feed ourselves better, and we found out how to raise our standard of living to help control the spread of disease by cleaning up the water supply.
As soon as a country really cleans up its water supply, it already begins to see a reduction in infant death rate. And then with modern medicine on top of that, death rates have gone way down.
When death rates fall below birth rates, populations grow. Scientists describe this pattern in what they call the demographic transition model.
It describes what went on in the industrialized countries. And what happened was we started out with high birth rates and high death rates. With the advent of modern medicine, the death rate came down, but the birth rate stayed high. And it means, therefore, that the population is growing very, very rapidly.
At the beginning of the century, the average woman in India was having 6 or 7 children. And now that has declined to 3 or 4 children, but still, the death rate has gone down so much that the population of India continues to grow. And that's true everywhere. It's taken a long time in many countries for the birth rate to catch up to the death rate.
And in some countries like Sweden, the birth rate actually just about equals the death rate. So they have zero population growth.
Zero population growth is a situation where the numbers of people from year to year are exactly the same. In other words, there's no change.
To achieve zero population growth, a population must first attain its replacement birth rate.
The generational replacement rate, which is what we mean when we say the average woman in the United States right now is having about 2 children each, that does not mean zero population growth. That just means that the group of women of reproductive age right now are just replacing themselves and their partners for the next generation.
We can see why a population grows even after reaching its replacement rate by using an age structure diagram. Each layer represents a different age group, with the youngest members on the bottom, those able to reproduce in the middle, and the oldest individuals at the top. As time passes, the population grows older. Some members die, and new members are added at the bottom. If we see a large group rise into its reproductive years, we can expect them to bear a large number of children. Even if the couples only replace themselves, they'll produce an equally large group of offspring. This means a population must maintain its replacement birth rate for over half a century before it achieves zero population growth.
Some of the European countries that have achieved zero population growth have an age structure that's almost rectangular. There's almost equal proportions or numbers of people in every age class. On the other hand, if a pyramid has a big, broad base, a lot of children are being born. And when they become reproductive, they're going to produce a lot of children in their own right.
By studying the age structure of the world's human populations, scientists know most developing countries have years of steady growth ahead of them.
We peaked actually in the rate of population growth in the mid-1960s, but the numbers of people being added to the world's total right now, that is the greatest numeric increase that we have ever had. And we are continuing on a path of adding 1 billion people about every 10 to 12 years.
And we start to feel intra-specific competition That is pressure from our neighbors, pressure from other individuals of our same species, competing for limited resources, polluting our environment.
Every single one of us is influenced by population growth, whether that population growth is occurring near where we live or halfway around the world, because we are all constrained by the resources that are available to human beings on this globe. Given the known level of technology, there isn't enough food that could be grown to provide enough food at the average American diet for all 5.7 billion people with whom we share the planet. So in that sense, we've actually exceeded the carrying capacity for our known ability to feed all human beings. Ultimately, we all agree, I think, that the death rate should come down to as low as it can be. The only solution is for the birth rate to come down.
As we humans work to reduce birth rates, our populations continue to grow. This not only affects our lives, but also those connected with us in the intricate web of life on Earth.
The health of our ecosystem, planet Earth, is dependent on the most diverse possible set of interactions that can occur in nature, and we as human beings lose track of the fact that we are part of the system, and that system, planet Earth out there, has limits.